And as they expected, actually, if your CEO plays golf, the number of females is significantly lower in the board, and they are paid significantly more shitty. So
I knew it. Golfers totally suck. Just kidding, golfers.
No, and actually, they say in the paper it's a correlation, not a causation. Yeah, so that's
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vollendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Most Awesome Founder podcast and another of our inspiration sessions where we discuss current topics that made us think, learn, and laugh. Of course, this wouldn't be possible with my podcasting partner, Professor Dries, who is once again joining us today.
Hi, Gerrit.
Dries, it's good to do this again, man. It's we've had some really awesome guests these past few weeks, but you know I have a soft spot for our point counterpoint discussions because, frankly, at this stage in my life, I probably wouldn't be so current on the interesting academic literature that's coming out, and you always seem to bring some interesting papers into the equation.
No, looking forward to another interesting discussion.
Cool. Well, as usual, we like to start with something that made us learn. So why don't I pass the mic to you and you kick things off. I'm curious to see what you've got in your pocket today.
Yes, and I deliver on my promises in that respect. So I brought another academic paper, actually one that was published earlier this year in Strategic Management Journal. And the title is Blinded by the Person, Experimental Evidence from ID Evaluation, which was co-authored by Linus Dallander, Arno Thomas, Martin Wallin, and Rebecca Angström. And as the title suggests, this is a paper on the topic of ID evaluation. And so in a lot of context, I think people evaluate ideas. I think about pitching competitions, but also within companies, we often see that nowadays companies organize innovation challenges, and then people have to evaluate ideas, and in the end, the best ideas will be picked. They might get some funding for further development, or they might get an award, whatever they get. Now, what we know, and this is nothing new, that's quite established in academic research, is that when people have to evaluate ideas, they might face a lot of cognitive biases. Maybe based on your experience, Gerrit, what would you think? Or when you have to evaluate ideas, for instance, in pitching competitions, what do you think are the most dominant cognitive biases that you might face? What might kind of implicitly influence you in your decision-making, in your grading, if you have to do that?
I mean, you know, I'm always thinking about how I'm assessing my own ideas, but how do I assess others? It's interesting because I'm not sure especially in those type of competitions, I'm not looking as much at the ideas. I'm looking at the people that are executing those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think inherently there's some confirmation bias, you know, that comes into play. I guess maybe the one that I think of the most is like apophenia as a bias, right? Like where I'm thinking that correlations are actually causations, right? Where something is kind of two dots are connected, and you kind of, especially if the narrative and the story behind it is very compelling, and the person presenting it comes with a good kind of sense of expertise, you can tend to take that as causation. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of, I'd like to say that I don't have the traditional biases, you
And
know,
what would you
of
say as
the
a
way we
traditional
kind of,
bias? What would you think of?
well, I mean, I think the ones people think about the most when you think of bias, especially selection of humans, you think of, you know, discriminatory
Yeah,
biases based on gender, nationality,
yeah,
whatever, ageism. I mean, there's a ton that can come into play, and many of them are even subconscious. So I think I've learned over the years not to say I don't have any biases. I just say that I
yeah.
try to mitigate the ones and be aware of them as they
Yeah,
unfold.
and indeed, this paper focused on quite traditional biases like gender bias, but also bias in terms of location of people. So, are people located in the same geographic area than you, or in different geographic areas, or even in the same unit as you, or different ones? Um, and traditionally, how have companies have tried to solve this, or even in the academic world? And a straightforward way to solve that kind of potential risks of biases is to make the person that submits the idea anonymous, so that you simply do not give information to the evaluator about the person that has submitted the idea. And so the kind of the common assumption is by anonymizing the person, that kind of biases can be ruled out, and that will give a kind of more fair judgment. So what the authors in this paper did was actually to test, okay, is that really true? So do we see that if you anonymize ideas, so if you do not give personal information to the evaluator, does that change the evaluation? And they did that in a kind of academic way. So they created randomly, they attributed ideas to people. And so randomly, they gave personal information like the gender and the location. And sometimes they didn't give the information so that they could see, okay, if we give the same idea to people, but one time without the information and one time with the information, does that change the evaluation in a significant way? And the interesting thing of this study was they find no single effect. Actually, anonymizing the ideas did not change any evaluation. So they could not find significant differences in terms of gender, in terms of location, between the group that received anonymized information and the group that received all information. So actually, they had to come to the conclusion, maybe this type of bias is less influential than we think, because apparently we cannot find a significant difference in the evaluations between people that received all the information and people that only received the ID information. So that for me was quite an interesting finding. And actually, what I really liked as an academic was that this is a paper with no single significant effect, which still got published in a top-level journal, which is actually quite rare. So typically, as a researcher, you're looking for significant relationships because you want to tell something new. And this was a paper that was accepted without any significant relationship, but still, I think, quite interesting findings, namely, actually, when we are evaluating ideas, the gender and the location might not actually matter that much than we might have thought.
It's interesting. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack in what you just said. I mean, one being is the fact that the paper got published,
Yeah.
which maybe brings in a bias in itself, which is the confirmation bias. And, you know, because it's sending the message that I think like people want to
Yeah.
hear, right? That like there is no correlation. I think there's also, you know, there is this kind of narrative that entrepreneurship and innovation is a meritocracy, right? And whoever has the best idea and the biggest innovation, it nothing else particularly matters. I'm not sure I totally buy into that. But I mean, what do you think the lesson learned? I mean, to me, from a practice standpoint, if I was assessing you know, like you said, a pitch competition or something along those lines, anonymizing the whoever the pitcher is or the idea generator is, really prevents an actually good analysis, because if that's the people that potentially have to execute on that
Yeah.
idea, that is a key variable that's kind of being
Yeah.
missed. So looking at an idea in a vacuum is kind of the classic misnomer of ideas are
Yeah.
everything, when I think other research and other practice has shown otherwise. So I'm curious. I mean, I think it's an interesting topic to talk about, but what do you think the practical relevance of this is? Like, do you find that there's a takeaway that we can
Yeah,
think
for
about
me, there are
out of
two
this?
takeaways. The first is that actually I see maybe not that much in the startup context, but in other contexts, like when governments organize this kind of competitions or companies, they often put a lot of effort. And to be honest, also, they invest quite some money in trying to make the process as fair as possible. And there actually, indeed, a, a certain dimension of fairness will be to anonymize the identity of the person who submits the idea. And so what this paper seems to suggest is maybe these are simply sunk costs. And so you're investing money in trying to solve something that actually doesn't have an impact. And maybe you can spend that money that you're spending on trying to make it as fair as possible. You might actually want to spend it in a different way to address more important issues. So for me, that's the first important learning. A second is more related to the paper. One thing I was still wondering was, if you look at the paper, the people that evaluate do not really have skin in the game. Yeah? So, for instance, in contrast to when you have to make decisions, do I invest in a certain startup? These people just had to rate ideas, but whether they give a high rating or a low rating, in the end, for them personally, it doesn't make any difference. And so I was thinking, if there would be skin in the game, would you then not be more likely to see biases? Because then the decision making becomes much more influential. So that was something where I was wondering, and which I think would be interesting follow-up research. If I really will benefit or will be hampered by the outcomes of the idea, maybe then I might be more kind of sensitive to biases than in this case, where actually the outcome of my selection has not really implications for me personally.
Hmm. Hmm. It's when I think of participating in programs like selection. I'm on the selection committee of a number of
Yeah.
accelerators, right? And I'm looking at these concepts, and yeah, usually we usually see who the founders are, and there is absolutely a bias in play when I'm looking at like founders pitching their ventures, but it's very rarely. I mean, for me personally, I almost have a bias for the underrepresented,
Mm.
because there's a bit of a hustle and a grit that oftentimes comes along with those folks. But where I certainly see some biases in what their backgrounds and what their experiences are, and I tend to give greater weight to someone that has the experience before. But I find I have a lot of biases embedded within the ideas themselves. Like I tend to be attracted to business models that I'm
Yeah.
familiar with, right? And I mean, I don't know if you call it a bias even at that point, but having built a marketing tech company before, when I see interesting marketing tech businesses, like I tend to favor them. If I can't poke a hole in them right away, I tend to favor them because I like that particular vertical. So I think this is, I guess, just when we're talking about
Yeah.
biases at a high level, like the submitter of
Uh,
the bias, like you said, if it's a competition, I think if you're, I've seen these like competitions for like a jingle or a catchphrase or a logo or something, where really people can select, those biases can be very strong based on the person
yeah.
that is submitting them, if they come from another country or another background. But when I think of innovation ideas, I guess for me, the biases come from somewhere
Yeah,
else.
and actually, the bias that you mentioned, which is called the expertise bias, has been shown in research. So it has been shown that if you need to evaluate an idea that is closer to your own expertise domain, that you tend to give a more favorable rating than when you have to evaluate an idea that is much farther away from your domain of expertise. So that's definitely something that it's another type of bias that was not addressed in this research that can play around. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess mitigating selection bias by having the evaluators be as diverse and broad as possible maybe plays a role in that too. But yeah, that's a tough hurdle to overcome, to eliminate biases, especially in subjective decision making, right? Interesting. But yeah, I do appreciate the idea that we think so much that science is about these aha moments and finding grand results that are unexpected, but the fact that results that are pretty mundane that we had hoped for also have meaning. I think there's a pretty nice lesson in there too. All right, I'm gonna go. And I'm bringing in a topic that is rather far out of my domain of expertise, but quite deep into your
Okay,
domain of expertise.
so I should like it by definition.
maybe I don't know. But it's once again, I think it's a topic that keeps coming up for us over and over again. But it's the topic of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there was and as usual, I'm not pulling from academic literature. I'm pulling from the New York Times, but actually from just like 5 days ago. So there was a really interesting article in the Times that's titled "Can AI Invent?" and it's by the author is Steve Lohr. And essentially what he was the thesis of it is that can an individual use artificial intelligence to invent something and then protect it as intellectual property? So this, I had no idea, but this has become a very, very big topic with governments around the world, with the US taking a lot of action just within the past couple months on this particular subject. So in 2023, so far in the first half of 2023 alone, the US Patent and Trademark Office has hosted 2 separate events that they're calling the AI inventorship listening sessions. And they're essentially trying to get input from the public and expertise on this topic. The reason they organized those sessions is there was a federal court decision last year called Toller versus Vidal, which said that a patent inventor must be a natural person. But it didn't address whether inventions made by human beings with the assistance of AI are eligible for patent protection. Right. So the author brought in a pretty interesting person into the equation, a gentleman named Dr. Ryan Abbott, who's a professor at the University of Surrey Law School and a founder of a group called the Artificial Inventor Project. And what he's been doing has been filing dozens of like pro bono test cases around the world trying to seek legal protection for AI generated inventions. And his whole argument is that AI, if you think of the kind of traditional tools of invention, right? It might be paint or pencils. It might be a microscope. AI is somewhat different because it's not confined to doing things that the tool is specifically programmed to do, but it does create unscripted results nevertheless, right? So he's basically saying that it's kind of the tool itself is stepping into the shoes of the person. And he's basically, his whole thesis is that without patent protection, AI innovations will essentially be kind of hidden in the world of trade secrets, rather than being disclosed in a public filing, which in the end slows down progress of entire industries or domains themselves. So there's this kind of interesting concept of, is AI the inventor or is AI the tool of the inventor? So let's start with a guy that's been doing a lot of inventing with AI lately. From your very busy LinkedIn profile has made that quite evident, and all the cool. I've been loving your Slack group as well. There's some really interesting stuff coming out of that. Shameless plug.
Yes.
But but for you, Dries, do you think AI inventions should be protectable by patent?
I would say yes, because, and I think you need to go to the fundamental. How do patent offices grant patents? Yeah, so if you have a new invention and you want to get a patent on it, which means you will have a kind of monopoly to commercialize that invention for a certain number of years, patent offices use a number of criteria. I think the most important one is novelty. So you need to be able to demonstrate that your invention is novel, that you are the first one to invent something that nobody has invented before. And I think the current generative AI systems are indeed able to generate novelty. So I would say, I think they can meet that criterion. I would not agree here with the person you mentioned that talked about this issue about, are they specifically programmed to do so? Because there I would say even generative AI is programmed to do a specific task. Namely, for instance, ChatGPT, in the end, it's a system that is programmed to predict the next word in a sentence. So for me, it is still programmed to do a specific task. But I think by doing that, it can generate novel output.
But I think this is the fundamental question, right? You just said it can generate novel outputs. At least in the law in the US, it says inventions must be created by natural persons. So the question is the AI creating the invention, or is the person that is prompting or programming the AI creating, actually creating that invention?
I think it heavily depends on the prompt, not? Because if I would prompt generate me something novel, then it's the AI generating something. But if I create a much more extensive prompt that kind of lets the AIs just do the dirty work, so I think it heavily depends on the prompting, which
but isn't that an interesting conundrum though, right? Because then we have to start asking ourselves is, who is the tool and who is the inventor, right? In some case, the way when you think of prompts in that term, maybe it's the human that's the tool and the AI is the inventor, right? If you're kind of providing, I was thinking one of the reasons that made this article kind of stick with me is someone posted in your Slack group the other day about prompts for startup idea generation, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I have no idea how I would utilize that, but I found it interesting, and I said, okay, and then I read this article, and I'm like, if I prompt, whatever ChatGPT to say, give me the best startup ideas for X, and it presented something, whose idea is it? Like, and I find something in there that I decide I want to execute on or whatnot. I mean, nowadays, when you think about it, even more interestingly, how AI is writing code, right? Like, now is that code base protectable? Is it yours to protect?
Yeah, and even more problematic, the way in which AI produces that code is because it has read a lot of code of other people. So then you always come to the question, to what extent should the people that have written the original code be acknowledged in your code, although it's often almost impossible to recognize which code snippets AI exactly used to produce the new code. So that's, I think, a big legal struggle that nobody knows the answer at the moment. But you see it in a lot of domains. I listened to the daily podcast from New York Times, and there they were talking about that actually comedians were now suing AI because, for instance, it was Sarah Silverman, one of the more famous US comedians, who was saying like, look, if I type in write me a joke as Sarah Silverman, the AI can perfectly do that, but it means it is actually using my intellectual property to write Sarah Silverman jokes, which makes my personal contribution less valuable. Yeah? Because if people can just imitate me, I as a person might become less valuable, and I should be compensated for that by companies like OpenAI. So I think we are just at the starting point of very difficult legal discussions where, to be honest, nobody knows at the moment in which direction we will go.
Well, this is an interest. I mean, what you just brought up with the comedian, it's almost like AI is turning us into avatars of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Like it can generate our personas and our own value and our own intellectual property without even us doing it ourselves. That's yeah, that is a little bit unnerving. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I did see something the other day about like, what AI is doing for, I mean, it was about pornography,
Yeah.
right? And how like AI is generating pornography with well-known personas that is literally indistinguishable from those people themselves, and there's absolutely no recourse for it. And it's interesting to even thinking about, okay, they're going to sue OpenAI, but as OpenAI, again, there's an accountability
Yeah.
question that comes into play, right? Like, are they accountable for that? At what point is it operating on its own, right? You create a tool, tools can be used in negative ways, right? It's like if someone kidnaps somebody and takes them on a airplane, like is it the airplane's fault?
Yeah.
And it's these philosophical questions are going to get, I think, more and more common and louder and louder.
No, and I think the fundamental question is, do we need new legislation to deal with this specific AI case, or can we leverage existing legislation and just apply it on AI? For instance, you could say if you abuse AI to make a pornographic movie of somebody else, I think with existing legislation, you can already litigate that. But I can also see cases where AI is so specific that we really would need specific legislation to deal with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's still a human element, right? If you ask an AI to create porn about a famous person, and then you actually utilize, publish, or try to monetize that piece that you created, then certainly there's a clear liability in place. But um, I mean, is there a protection for someone that just wants to ask questionably ethical or legal things to the AI? Is it only what they do with it or what they allow it to create as well, right? Where does intent come into play? Like, so much of the law, I think, has to do with intent. Um, and with AI, there is not necessarily, at least from the AI side, there's not necessarily an intent. There is just,
Yeah, in
calculation.
the end, these AI systems are simply statistical systems that are very good in predicting the next word in a sentence. That's how they are trained. That's all they do. So to what extent can you make that kind of systems liable for being abused for pornographic movies? That's a big question.
Indeed. I can tell you one thing, since I've been digging more and more into AI, my God, I can almost not open Instagram anymore. It's just one influencer after the other throwing out new AI tools. Do this and tie it to this and take your prompt and put it into this. And it's I thought Web3 was madness. This is next level madness, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like the whole world is, everybody sees this as like the big gold rush and everyone's chasing after it. And unfortunately, usually in the gold rush, you don't always get the best actors. You get the people looking for opportunity.
Yeah.
All right. Let's pivot to something that made you think this week, Dries.
Yes, and I brought another paper with me because that's my role, I suppose.
That is kind of your shtick, isn't it?
And actually, it's another one also related to gender again. And I was intrigued even by the title already, so that what triggered me. So the title is "Hitting the Glass Ceiling: Golfing CEOs, Exclusionary Schema, and Career Outcomes for Female Executives." And this is a paper published in Journal of Management this year by Lee Biggerstaff, Joanna Campbell, and Bradley Goldie. And so this is a paper, as the title suggests, that tries to make a connection between your CEO playing golf and to what extent females in your company are underrepresented. And so this is an empirical paper. And the question that they want to ask themselves is actually if a CEO, what this person is doing outside of his or her work, in this case, his work, because they looked at male CEOs. So what he is doing outside of his working environment, to what extent might that have an impact on decisions within the company? And so for this study, they focused on a very specific potential hobby of male CEOs, namely playing golf. And so what they simply did was collecting data on CEOs and to check whether they played golf or not, which you can do actually quite accurately, because if you play golf, you're registered formally in all kinds of stuff. And then they could see, okay, if the CEO plays golf, what is the impact on the amount of females that are present in the executive board? And what kind of impact does that have also on the compensation of these females? And as they expected, actually, if your CEO plays golf, the number of females is significantly lower in the board, and they are paid significantly more shitty. So
I knew it. Golfers totally suck. Just kidding, golfers.
No, and actually, they say in the paper it's a correlation, not a causation. Yeah, so that's the first important thing. But still, they see that if your CEO plays golf, that's a very good predictor of whether females are underrepresented in your company and whether they are underpaid. And the explanation there is that actually golf is a very exclusionary sport. So it's still a kind of sport where you don't have a lot of women. And so the reasoning of the author is that if you are doing that, if you're kind of active in that kind of setting where it's kind of socially accepted that females are excluded, that might also translate to your company setting, and you might actually find it more easily to not have a lot of women on your board and pay them less. That was their explanation, which I thought was... So I thought it was very creative research, very interesting research, but it made me think, namely, it made me think like, if you look at the context in which we are active, namely the startup context, we also see a lot of underrepresentation of female entrepreneurs. That's still a very big issue. I think also this year, again, a lot of reports have emerged where the number of female entrepreneurs is still depressingly low in Europe. And so I was thinking, could we find similar kind of exclusionary activities of founders that might kind of accelerate this or strengthen this? So are there founder activities that push male founders to be... It will not be golf, but are there similar things that might actually push them in this kind of exclusionary schemas? And before I share my ideas, do you have any ideas about...
Yeah. Yeah. So, a few months ago, I gathered quite a few founder friends, and actually most of which have been on this podcast at one time or another, and just for a catch up. And we went to Vellenwerk, which is an indoor surf wave here. and there was a group of us, and it was fun. We went surfing and had a great time. And when we all got together, we were kind of laughing. We're like, "Oh my god, this feels like the worst tech bro thing we've all ever done." And Daniel Hahnemann, who is one of them, he was like, "Oh, bro, you have not even if you haven't been to the climbing gym in Berlin, that's where you would really see it. It's where like all of the kind of VC funded entrepreneurs like to go hang out." Again, just like golf, I don't think a climbing wall or a surf wave needs to be, exclusive to men. I don't think it has the historical cultural connotations of golf,
Yeah.
like where like, where the Masters is played at Augusta was men only until a decade or two ago. Um, but I do think there is maybe a tendency towards more traditionally masculine activities. I mean, I see a lot of founder teams and going with even with their investors to sporting
Yeah.
events, for example, which again can be open to everybody, but tends to be a bit more male. But the one thing that I experience, and I don't want to deflect from the importance of gender representation, but the one that I've felt a lot
Mhm.
myself is drinking
Yeah.
culture. So I'm not really a drinker. I very rarely drink
Mm.
alcohol, but so much of the activity around the startup scene, investor meetings, involve, all right, let's go out and have drinks, or let's meet for drinks. And um, so I do think there are some kind of cultural uh, markers that exist in this space that can be exclusionary in to a number of different groups. I'm not sure that doesn't exist in
Yeah.
everything, but I do. I'm a big believer in the douchey tech bro scene that exists everywhere where like entrepreneurship exists. And, I would love to chop that off at the knees if possible.
Yeah, but actually, these were exactly also the two that I was thinking about. So, what I see is you have a lot of founders that engage in quite extreme sporting activities. And then there's also this thing about they go together to clubs, drinking late in the evening. And I think, yeah, these can be quite exclusionary activities that at least make it not easier for women to become kind of embedded in this founder community. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think golf differs from the others too, because I think some of the things we're talking about tends to be the domain of somewhat younger people. Actually, a lot of female founders I know tend to be into slightly more extreme
okay.
sports. I think there's maybe a correlation there of risk
Yeah.
tolerance that exists. One of the ladies on my team right now just leaves tomorrow for the Azores to go paragliding, right? That's just one example. I think there is maybe some tendencies to those types of things. But what's interesting about this paper is we're talking about
Yeah.
CEOs of arguably larger companies, which tend to infer an
Yeah.
older demographic as well. And my mother, who's almost 80, always asks me if I want to play golf, and I give her the same
Okay.
answer: is I'll play golf with her when I'm too old to do anything fun. But yeah, I mean, I think we could all do a better job of creating more inclusive opportunities. I would even, narrow it down a little bit. Like even with my companies, when I've tried to do events and retreats and stuff, it wasn't, I don't recall ever doing anything that felt maybe exclusive to men versus
Mm.
women. But I would say oftentimes I chose activities and events that my engineering teams were less keen on doing because they tended to be outdoors and more active. And not to generalize, but there were definitely some people on my engineering teams were not really into outdoor, you know, active physical
Yeah.
activities and whatnot. So, yeah, it's something to think about. But I'm curious, just on this topic, like, what do you know about this is a huge topic in the US for sure about women representation at executive levels. And then you look at parts of Europe where, like in the Nordics, for example, where they have
Yeah.
mandated representation and oftentimes equal representation at those levels. Do you know anything about how that is in Germany? And, is Germany lagging behind, or do you have any insights? And what are your thoughts on the kind of legal mandate for 50-50?
I think, and to be honest, I'm not an expert, but as I understand it, in Germany, it is not obliged, but it's kind of recommended. Let's say it like that. But so it's not like in the Nordics where there is kind of now legislation. So you don't have that in Germany, but there is a kind of, for instance, I think if you do not have females on your board, you need to explicitly explain that in your annual statements or something like that. So you then are at least forced to give an explanation of why you don't have them. So there is definitely a push, but no obligation for us, as far as I know. That's, I think, is the situation at the moment in Germany.
Gotcha. So the lesson we take away from this is, ladies, learn to play golf.
Now, I think we should not
Don't
put
do
in
that.
the shoes of the ladies.
I know that was a terrible thing to say. Of course, I don't mean that, but sometimes you have to make humor of such ridiculous things. If golf ends up being the driver of success in our, I'll actually tell you a funny story, because I had I loosely call a friend, but a guy that I grew up with, and he was I, I don't know how to put it any way. He was incredibly handsome. He was just he was like a movie star handsome guy. I would say he wasn't the sharpest marble in the bag either, but he was like a ranked, like a top golfer.
Okay.
And he never did well in school. He scraped his way through uni, actually on a golf scholarship, and we always wondered, like, what was going to happen to him. And the joke is, now he's in his 40s, but we always called him a corporate whore, because he was essentially, every job he got was with a pretty big company, and he would be like a customer liaison, and he would literally go out and play
Okay.
golf with these high-end customers. So that's pretty much all he did, was, I think, drink scotch and play golf and make sure his hair looked really nice. and he has become quite financially well off as a result of it. But the fact that, when you shared this, it just made me think of him, and was like, wow, this social activity, this sport is actually embedded strategically in the cultures of a lot of companies. Now, one might argue that he was being sent to meet with customers to play golf who were also male, and maybe the utilitarian approach would be to have a stunningly beautiful woman playing golf with them, but maybe that's crossing even further boundaries by doing that. Cool. That was a thought-provoking topic indeed, Dries. Who knew that golf would elicit such a conversation? All right. I'm going to share a paper or an article that came out actually last year. So it's a bit dated, but it's a topic that's been on my mind for quite a while. And it was written by one of our former guests, the immutable Steve Blank. And he wrote this paper last year for the Harvard Business Review. And it's entitled, "Entrepreneurs, Is a Venture Studio Right for You?" So, Dries, as you know, I've kind of spent the past few years fiddling around in the venture building, venture studio space. And to be honest, like, with multiple touch points now, I would say these experiences have left me with a lot more questions than they have answers, in terms of their efficacy, their value proposition to entrepreneurs. And And reading this paper was, I think, great because it made me realize that I'm probably not alone in this thought, since a luminary like Steve was pondering it as well. So the paper really kind of talks about, it starts by talking about the different types of startup support programs, most notably accelerators, incubators, and venture studios. So for those folks that don't really understand the difference, accelerators are usually fixed term programs. They have a specific curriculum to them. They might offer a physical space for the startups to work in. It tends to be early stage ventures, and it comes with some form of capital contribution in many cases. In the WHU case, it doesn't. It comes with other value add like networks and access to investors and things. But there is somewhat of a, in most cases, somewhat of a transactive environment. Accelerators tend to crank out support to a lot of startups per year. Take a small piece of them and hope for a return. Incubators are similar. They tend to be longer term, longer duration. The physical space is more central to it, and it is less common that they provide capital. They provide sometimes technical or mentor or advisory support, and they kind of create a space and an ecosystem where these where ventures can kind of be nurtured or nurture themselves. They can crank out quite a few companies per year as well. But they tend to be longer term, so less than accelerators. The venture studio model is, I would say, notably different from all of them, because in this case, it's not external companies coming in with ideas, but the venture studio itself is ideating or coming up with startup concepts, and then they're doing their due diligence and their discovery, and they're validating those ideas. Once they find an idea that they have validated, they then recruit founders to take that idea and essentially go to market with it. That means they nurture them for much, much longer, and they provide those founders support. They tend to come with pretty significant capital along the way, and yeah, they're really kind of holding the, I would say, more than holding the founder's hands, but really acting as partners. The Probably the most significant piece is the equity stake for the founders that are listening. Incubators, since there's not much capital, they take very, very little, if anything. Accelerators, a marginal amount. It could be anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15%. In the venture studio model, it's much more significant. And the range Steve Blank talks about is 30 to 80%. What I have experienced is usually, at least in Europe, somewhere around 25 to 50%. Although if you would throw something like Rocket Internet in the mix, where they're putting tens of millions or hundreds of millions in, like they did in the old days, they were taking much, much larger percentage. So a couple interesting points I want to share before I want to ask you a question is, after reading that paper, I did a little bit of research. I wanted to understand, what are the efficacy of these things? And when you look at the IRR, or the rate of return on investment, the venture studio model as compared to accelerator or traditional VC tends to be 2 to 3 times greater than a more traditional startup investment. So the ROI on them seems to be good. So their ability to mitigate risk seems to be a lot stronger. The fundamental challenge, I would say, is, can you bring in entrepreneurs with a much weaker value proposition? Which brings me to the last point that I wanted to make. There are somewhere around 1,000 known established venture studios that exist in the world, with over 50% of them in Europe. I'm curious. I have my ideas. There was no data on this. But Dries, why do you think Europe dominates this scene? can you envision why more than half, when way more of the startup activity in the world happens outside of Europe, why is this model something that the European investor market has taken such a strong liking to?
Now, my intuition would be, and it's simply my intuition, would be that this kind of models are attractive for more kind of risk-averse people. So I would say in general, in Europe, we are more risk-averse. We don't go for shooting at the moon, but for something reasonable. And so I think a lot of people with kind of entrepreneurial ambitions in Europe would find this a much more comfortable situation, where you have a kind of corporate that is kind of still paying you like a salary, but at the same time you can be entrepreneurial. And at the same time, for the corporate, this kind of entrepreneurship tends to be a bit closer to their current activities. It's not really like the disruptive, completely breakthrough things that are far away from them. So I think both from the corporate perspective, but also from the entrepreneurship perspective, this is a model that is a bit more in line with our more risk-averse attitude, I would say. But that's my intuition. I don't know. Maybe you have a totally different idea, but that would be my intuition.
I would tend to agree. I mean, I could make some assumptions about, management culture being a little bit different and top down, maintaining control a little bit longer. But I think the risk aversion part is pretty bang on. I think one thing to think about is, Steve Blank basically describes that there are four main types of venture studios. You can kind of put them in four different buckets. The first one is tech transfer studios. I find that very interesting because I would argue that Europe is lagging behind massively when it comes to university tech transfer. I'm actually not familiar with any tech transfer venture studios in mainland, in Germany at least. Maybe there are, where they're actually, their whole strategy is to identify IP coming out of the university and commercialize it in that model. Do you
Now,
know
I
any?
think Unternehmertum in München also does that, I think. So I think at least in the München ecosystem, there are this kind of things, but I'm also not that up to date about it.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot of great activity happening in Germany because a bunch of smart people in our ecosystem have realized that they've been lagging behind, and our universities are doing some great stuff. But all the examples that Steve Blank uses are from the US. The second one, which is one that I'm quite familiar with, is corporate venture studios, right? So there's kind of two different ways to look at that. One is sourcing the ideas and the intellectual property from inside of the company. The other one is maybe perhaps the more kind of what we did, or maybe what BCG or McKinsey Leap were doing before, which was basically taking an external approach to the corporate and kind of bringing in bright entrepreneurial minds to identify opportunities that, gets very difficult to see when you're focused on your core. Then there's, of course, the niche studio, which I think is quite an interesting one. That might be a studio that's focused on generating IP in a very specific domain. And one of the examples that he brought up is Flagship Pioneering, which is a healthcare one, and that incubated LS18, which later became known as Moderna. So that's one hell of a venture studio output. And then the fourth example he uses, which is that the industry agnostic studio. That I would say is what I see the most of in Germany. And his example, of course, is Rocket Internet. So these industry agnostic studios, I think, are interesting. And there are more and more of them popping up, or even the niche ones kind of fall into the same bucket. Hey, there's this AI boom. Let's build a venture studio for AI or Web3 or longevity or whatever that might be. What I think about that as a founder, what the value proposition is, right? And as I said earlier, comes with more capital, comes with more support, comes with less equity than you would if you were doing it in the wild. What do you think is compelling about that offer for entrepreneurs?
I think it depends on the type of entrepreneur. So I think this really high risk taking entrepreneur that wants to create the next unicorn. Think about Roman Kirsch that we interviewed in the recently. I think he would not be a guy that could work in a venture studio. But I think other people that are like the people, I would say people with a consulting background, but that have kind of the need to be a bit more creative, then I think for them this kind of setting works quite nicely because they will have more freedom and autonomy to show entrepreneurship, but at the same time they will still be working in a context that is familiar to them, and that gives them some level of safety and control that they might want to have. So that would be my feeling.
I think you nailed it, right? And I think it comes back to what you talked about earlier, which is this concept of risk, right? What I've seen through my subjective N of one experience is that the founders that are going into build ventures in venture studios, they tend to be a little bit older. They may have families. They may have other responsibilities. You plug into a venture studio, good chance you start collecting a salary right away. You get resources. You don't have to spend months or more going out trying to raise capital, going from, it's that we talk so much, Peter Thiel talks about 0 to 1, but sometimes the hardest part is like 0 to 0.1, right? And getting the ship to just lift off a little bit. And this is where it mitigates it. So I'll wrap it up by telling you what Steve Blank suggests when looking for or considering a venture studio. Point number one, and I would say this is the one that I've noticed the most is most relevant, is the studio run by a former founder?
Okay.
Or does it have former founders as its full-time employees? I think it's very easy to find high net worths or people from the financial services world that are setting these things up, that have the money to be able to set it up, but don't necessarily have the entrepreneurial mindset to be able to incubate these ventures along the way. So look for ones that are run by entrepreneurs. The next one is, what percentage of equity are they asking for? If you think about it, these studios are taking 30 to 80% is what his numbers say. I've seen 25 to 50 or so, but you have to remember that if that studio takes 50% or more, you are not a founder.
Yeah, you're an employee.
You are an
Yeah.
employee. You are an employee, right? So, very interesting conundrum to come into. Like, how much is losing your agency as a founder worth to you in shortcutting the fundraising side of things? The third is, do you want a studio with specific expertise? Do you come from a specific domain? Do you have some specific shortcomings or lack of experience in particular areas that you can find it useful? And then last but not least, do they have enough funding? Because oftentimes they are startups too. I would say this is the challenge that I faced last year, where I was building a venture studio for a team in the UK, and they just weren't able to get all the funds they needed together to incubate enough ventures. So do they have enough funding? And then more importantly, do they have enough funding for you? Because if they're taking a reasonable chunk of equity, you need to make sure that you're getting what you would get in the wild or more in return. But I think it's to me, this was just a really interesting topic, considering, and I think you and I are both pretty fascinated with the history, the kind of historical background of the startup scene in Germany, and the role that companies like Rocket Internet played in that equation. And they're not really around in the true sense anymore. And I think this whole idea of like venture building, with the copycat model at least, had gone the way of the wind. But actually, we're now seeing this kind of renaissance of this type of model cranking out a lot of ventures, especially here in Berlin, where I seem to see a new venture builder venture studio popping up pretty damn frequently.
No, and I think maybe one thing where I might want to give some pushback, so Steve Blank is saying the venture studios should be headed by a founder. Now, for me, that would be not the most important thing. For me, it's important that the venture studio is headed by somebody with a very strong, or even that has a lot of power within the organization. So what I sometimes see is that if companies create a new venture studio, they will hire somebody from McKinsey or from Amazon to lead it because they think, oh yeah, these people know what tech is. But then these people are outsiders. And my experience, at least, is that venture studios often become actually quite political battlefields. So you might actually have to fight for your funding. Business units might give you pushback. And if you then do not have a leader that can fight these political battles, meaning somebody that has the kind of connections within the organization to build support, you might really be in trouble. So for me, actually, the more important thing would be, is the venture studio being led by somebody who has a strong political position within the organization?
It's interesting you say that. I'm going to push back at your pushback, which is you have to remember that, you know, one of the key roles of a venture studio is to actually ideate and then, you know, and validate and decide what they're going to invest in. Then the founders come in. I would argue that if you don't have your leadership team with the right entrepreneurial mindset and the right entrepreneurial toolkit, back to your bias topic earlier, is you start getting, which I think happens a lot with people that haven't been through executing bad ideas, you know, or even assessing ideas over and over and over again, that, you know, you get someone on the top of the hierarchy and is like, oh, I want to do this because this is cool. And I read about this somewhere. Let's do this. And if you don't have the framework behind it and you don't have the way to actually turn an idea either into action or to bury it 6 feet under, you get a venture studio that can be pretty damn.
No, but there I actually would agree with you. So if I say you need to have some powerful, it doesn't mean hire the CFO to run the venture studio, because then I think you're set for disaster, because CFOs are very smart, good people in playing the corporate game, but as you said, they don't have the entrepreneurial mindset and toolkit to run a venture studio. So there I would fully agree. But so I think that the challenge is, if you want to find a good leader for this venture studio, I would say it needs to be somebody from inside, but that has the entrepreneurial mindset. So he or she needs to have both, which might be quite rare, but at least in my experience, and I interact quite a lot with corporates, you have that kind of people within your organization. You will need to search for them, but they are out there. And if you can select them, then I think that's really a very fundamental condition for venture studio success, I would say.
Yeah, I would say within the corporate context, it's a little bit different, but in the corporate context, actually, it's a lot different, right? Because you start dealing with, as soon as you're building ventures within the corporate context, now those ventures are subjected to corporate governance, right? So now you have to go through the procurement systems and the payment systems, and you get kind of encumbered by the bureaucracy of the mothership. So oftentimes the corporate venture studios will happen, you know, in an external organization that's separate from it. I would say the one thing Steve Blank doesn't mention in here that I found from my experience, that if looking for a venture studio, think about governance. And this was something that I worked really heavily on last year when I was building one in Berlin, is how do you keep this separate, right? So you want to make sure that the venture building side of things is in a separate, not only unit, but arguably organization itself than the funding side of things, right? And this will help to mitigate those biases and conflicts of interest, that the venture team ideates, validates, come up with a concept, and then you take that to the fund side of things, where they go through a more traditional VC type analysis to determine whether they want to capitalize that business or not. And by separating it, then you kind of have a little more agency and autonomy, and you can kind of put the entrepreneurs on one side, and then you can put the finance people that are really kind of assessing investment in the other. And I think that's I don't know exactly how Rocket worked in that regard, because obviously it was a hugely successful one. But I think as we're looking at it moving forward, there's a lot of complex requirements in these things, and for that reason, I don't think we've had. Although my friend Felix recently sold his for 9 figures in Berlin, there haven't been too many that have really shown signs of success. And I include BCG, McKinsey, and the other big players. They just have not churned out many great successes as a result. Okay, beat that topic to death. But let's end it on a happy note, and give me something that made you chuckle recently.
Yes, and actually it's something that popped up on my LinkedIn very recently, and it made me laugh. And it's an academic paper that made me laugh. That's quite rare, but it made me laugh.
That speaks volumes, Dries.
And so the title is actually "How is ChatGPT's behavior changing over time?" And it's authored by people from the University of Stanford and Berkeley, so published recently, open source. And what they actually have done is analyzing the performance of GPT 3.5, so the a bit older model already, and GPT-4 over time. So they did some kind of tasks in GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 in March, and they did the same tasks again in June. And so task you have to think about, they asked it some mathematical problems like, is this a prime number, yes or no? They asked it some sensitive questions to see, is it willing to answer yes or no? They asked it to generate some code and to do some visual reasoning. And quite surprisingly, they found out that GPT-4 is getting more stupid. So they are actually...
The humanity is saved. Amazing.
So on a number of dimensions, actually, GPT-4 is significantly performing worse in June than in March. So actually, they found that this system seems to get worse instead of better, which of course is triggering quite some questions, because imagine that you have now started integrating GPT-4 in all kinds of applications, where for your decision making, you're relying on GPT-4 in all kinds of apps. Actually, what you are facing is the problem that your decision making might actually getting worse over time instead of better. And to be honest, this paper also kind of confirms my own anecdotal experience, where I have to say that over time, when I look at the output that GPT-4 is generating in terms of writing text, it's getting more disappointing. And initially, I was thinking it's just because our expectation level has been changing, of course. The first time when you see GPT creating this text out of nowhere, you're totally amazed. And so I was thinking, yeah, I'm just now, my expectation level is increasing. But actually, this paper tends to show, no, there is a kind of observable quality lowering in GPT-4, which I found quite amazing. And at the same time, as a 45-year-old, I was very comfortable that I'm not the only one facing cognitive decline over time. Apparently, even AI systems tend to get worse.
That's where you went with it, Dries? It's funny. I went a totally different direction in my head. I kept thinking of like, there's some weird metaphor for humanity, as we talk about the dumbing down of society, that in 5 years, GPT is just going to be doom scrolling TikTok and playing video games and has lost interest in all human knowledge.
No, but of course, the big question now is why, and I don't think there is yet an answer. Something that I found interesting, again, when I listened to this daily podcast, they were mentioning that you have these hobby writers. And so what do they do? For instance, you have Game of Thrones. And these hobby writers, they write kind of news stories in the Game of Thrones universe, but they use their own imagination. They let people fight with each other that never fought with each other, or they let people marry with each other that never married with each other. And actually, these people have been very upset because they noticed that their content has been integrated in these GPT models. And so if you ask GPT questions about fictional characters from Games of Thrones that have been written by the hobby writers, they will be able to give answers which make clear that it has incorporated that kind of knowledge. And so these people were very pissed off. And so what they have started to do is to simply create websites where they publish a lot of bullshit, but simply gitterish to kind of mislead the GPT system. So they are actually trying to kind of create a lot of noise on the web to actually misinform the GPT system. And so maybe it's this kind of actions that are actually contributing to the decline of GPT-4. That could be one of the explanations, that just people, I don't know, are just putting on the web the wrong mathematical calculations, and in that way you're actually kind of putting GPT-4 in a different direction.
It's, you know, you talked about kind of a deliberate approach, but I think of maybe the non-deliberate approach, right? Like, you know, you think about how bad grammar has gotten over the years, right? Like, I mean, is GPT eventually going to you know, start screwing up your and start writing LMFAO and LOL and, like, you know, really, because if you think that it's pulling from all of human knowledge, you know, there are some, I wouldn't say ubiquitous, but there are some common errors that exist within human knowledge that a large portion of the population get wrong. You know, like, it's obviously consuming that information too, right? So
no, or think about if you're using GPT, for instance, to write LinkedIn messages, which, to be honest, to some extent I do. It has a very specific kind of writing style for LinkedIn. And so then if you just copy paste it in your LinkedIn, you're kind of reinforcing it, because more and more it will see this writing style and will connect it with LinkedIn. So it will only reinforce. And in that way, you will get the quality is going down, because you kind of continuously reinforce the same writing style, and that might have huge implications.
Right. That's an interesting topic. Let's see how that one unfolds. All right, I'm going to wrap things up with a little game. I found a blog that it was just so up my alley. I just couldn't help but share it. And it's the Truex Startup Savant blog. And what they do from time to time is they identify strange yet successful startups. So I'm gonna read you a couple very short pitches of startups, and you tell me if you would invest, if you like the idea or you don't. Okay. First startup, it's from New York. It's called I Do, Now I Don't. So Josh Opperman started this company after his fiance of 3 months ended up leaving him. He was able to take the devastating feeling he experienced and transform it into a successful startup. I Do, Now I Don't is a Craigslist kind of online marketplace for fine jewelry for those who no longer have a need for their rings. And people, and he identified that people get a much better price if they're from a marketplace than they would if they attempted to return the ring to the store from which they bought it. So he turned his misery into a successful startup. What do you think?
This sounds like a great idea.
I thought so too. Let's you know, turn that frown upside down with financial success. Okay, number
come
2.
Up with that, I would like it, actually. So
I like it too. I think, and I imagine there's probably a pretty decent Tam Sam song for that, right? Pretty good market size, especially these days. All right, number 2. This one actually raised money off Shark Tank, so I'm biasing you a little bit. It's called Potato Parcel, and it comes out of Denton, Texas. So the idea of Potato Parcel is pretty simple. You send a whole potato to someone with a unique message written on top of it. That's it.
Okay. I
That's
was
it.
expecting
You
more.
take a potato, write a message on it, and you send it to someone.
Yeah,
Yay or nay?
I'm less convinced by this one than the first one.
Well, Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, who's one of the kind of most well-known sharks and probably the most cutthroat of the bunch and very rational. Yeah, he put 50 grand into it, and they're already up to 25K MRR and
Oh.
growing. How many potatoes do you have to sell to make 25K a month? I thought it was pretty impressive. All right, third one, third of four, and we'll wrap this up. This one's out of Australia. It's called Join My Wedding. So, you ever been to an Indian wedding,
No.
Dries? I have, and it's amazing. First time I got to pet an elephant, actually, was at a wedding. But these weddings are like, extravagant, week-long kind of parties, crazy expensive. They can cost hundreds of thousands of euros. So Join My Wedding is a website where people can sign up to attend Indian weddings as guests and just pay a small cost to do so. And their whole value prop is it's a great way to experience a different culture, meet new people, have a ton of fun while doing it, while the wedding party, which I think is pretty traditional, is supposed to be big and historically would bring in the whole community and the whole village. They get to have their big, broad celebration.
Okay.
What do you think?
No, that's again an interesting one. I can see
Yeah.
pain points from both sides of the market being solved here. So
you may have to buy your outfit, but I can attest that it is a damn good time. All right, last one. I wanted to throw this in of the many, many that I read, because it's one that people that live in Berlin will be familiar with. It's called Brewdog. And if you're into the microbrewery scene, there are multiple Brewdog breweries here in Berlin. They are originally out of the UK, founders from northern UK, Scotland, and I won't tell you how much money that they've raised yet, but the interesting thing is Brewdog does some very creative concepts, including making an ale that is 55% ABV. So imagine that is stronger than whiskey, vodka, gin. And so they made this 110 proof beer, sold it for $20,000 a bottle, and they served it. The bottle was embedded in a taxidermied roadkill. So some animal that got run over on the road, they taxidermized it, put the bottle in it, put 55% beer in it, and sold it for 20 grand a pop. What do you think?
I believe in that. I think and I find it a bit sad, but there is increasingly a kind of rich elite in the world that has simply so much money that they just want to spend it on the most crazy, extravagant stuff out there. And I think these guys perfectly play into that market. So in that way, I can really see their their contribution margins will be big, no? So I can really see
true.
that.
I know. I hate to say it. I might be one of those people, but on an impulse last year, I got on the waiting list to buy the Tesla Giga beer.
Okay.
Did you
didn't
hear about that? So it was part of Tesla launching their factory in Berlin, which, God, I know some people are going to hate me for this, but I thought it was kind of a novelty. I wanted to gift it to a friend who drove a Tesla, but I spent 180 euros on two beers.
Okay, but that's a different number, not? It's not.
It's not 20 grand, but that's an expensive fucking beer.
Of course,
Dries.
but it's a gift.
And I didn't even open it. But yeah, they procured a Berlin brewery to make these beers, and they put them in bottles that kind of look like the Giga truck. Pretty slick slick looking things. But anyways, BrewDog.
No, but I think it's
250 million.
Exactly the same like with this Apple Vision glass thing. I think it will be a success because there are so many rich people that will just want to buy this $4,000 Apple Vision thing because for them it won't matter and it will be a huge status symbol. So I think Apple should actually have asked $8,000 because I think still these people would have still bought it. It wouldn't make any difference.
Well, I mean, I'm the jerk off that spent 600 euros on the Apple AirPods Pro, but it was a good investment. I love them. But yeah, anyways, BrewDog, of course, they do actual breweries and stuff, and even doing their crazy things. They have raised 250 million euros to date and are one of the fastest growing breweries in the world. So those are just a few of the crazy startup ideas. I would love it if anyone listening has some ridiculous stories about those types of things as well, because I think it's, being in this world, I think you do too, especially being at WHU, see a lot of venture concepts every month, every year, tons and tons of different ones. And some seem so fucking ridiculous and turn out to be a gem. Some seem like a home run and are catastrophically bad in the end.
Although I have to say, in my courses, sometimes I also hear very fascinating ones. Maybe let me tell you one. I think I never told you. It was a group of students, and what they built was a business model where instead of selling your house, you would organize a tombola or a lottery, and then they would just kind of give the house to the one that won the lottery. But so it would be, instead of you selling your house to one person for like, I don't know, 400,000 euros, so they would organize a lottery and you could buy lottery tickets for like 10 euros. And so if 4,000 people would have, 40,000 people would buy a ticket, you would have your 400,000 euros, and then they would kind of just give it to the one that won the lottery. So in the end, you would still get your money for your house, but there would be one person out of the 40,000 that gets the house for 40 euros. I found that a very intriguing business model.
You find that intriguing until your neighbor's house is in one of those lotteries. You're like, no.
Yeah, that's a good point, maybe, but at least
even those €1 houses in Italy come with a lot of stipulations attached to them, right? Like
that's true. But I like the creativity.
Awesome.
Let's say it like that.
Fair enough. Yeah. It just reminds me that devil's in the details and all these things. But Dries, as usual, super fun. I feel like each time we do one of these, I am reminded to say we need to do them more often because the current topics, my learnings in your scholarship, are always a treat. So super great to have this episode once again.
Yes, thanks.
All right. And everyone that's listening, as usual, you've heard it before. If you like the episode, feel free to like, comment, subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming service. Of course, we're on YouTube as well. Until next time, bis nächstes Mal.
Bye.